Hello, I'm Pastor Chris Burish from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church here in Palos Heights. It's a joy to be with you today. As a pastor, one of the blessings that I have is to hear about all types of agencies and individuals that are making a positive impact in the lives of those in Palos Heights. The thing I always hear from them is that they'd love that more people knew about them because they really could make an impact in the lives of many others, including maybe yourself or somebody that you love. And it's in that spirit that we have our monthly Community Bridge. Thanks for joining. Today, I'm blessed to have with me a friend, Jim O'Connor. Jim was actually on this program well over a year ago, almost a year and a half ago, talking about the Second Story Foundation. Jim, it's great to have you.
It's great to be here, Chris. It's always good to see you.
Good. Well, hey, for those that hadn't tuned in or have never heard about Second Story before, tell us a little bit first about yourself and then about Second Story Foundation.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So my name is Jim O'Connor, and I am the executive director of the Second Story Foundation. I'm also a certified alcohol and drug counselor. The Second Story was founded in Palos Park in 2022, and we were founded to help men who are in early recovery from substance use disorder start to overcome really systemic problematic barriers to long-term, what we call durable recovery. And durable recovery kicks in at about 2, 3, 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so the longer someone who has a substance use disorder problem is able to maintain their sobriety and kind of grow and overcome, problems that, transportation, housing, community, their chances of lifelong sobriety go up exponentially year over year. Mm-hmm. So we're here to help people achieve that.
Fantastic. So what's the mission of the organization, if you were to say, to help us understand it in a succinct way?
Right. So in a succinct way, we work with men who have made an investment in their recovery by going to a 28-day inpatient program or a longer-term program. Once they've made that investment in becoming sober and deciding to change their lives, we're here to help them with housing, transportation, and now with a new project of ours, the Second Story Ranch, we're building a program to offer them wraparound holistic care with employment, housing, transportation, and community immersion all in one place.
Wow, that's fantastic. So before we get into these individual projects that Second Story has been involved with, whether it's transportation or housing or the ranch, as you mentioned, what are some of the effects to not just those that are in the care of the Second Story Foundation, but the community or the family members of those individuals?
Right. So substance use disorder severe, as we would clinically call it, causes a tremendous amount of suffering. And the individual, who's addicted or alcoholic suffers greatly, and a lot more than people know. But families suffer, communities suffer. To be in active substance use disorder, especially for a long time, people become someone they never meant to be. And so that hurts the person, right, who's not, maybe living up to their potential or who's not living according to their values. It also hurts, parents, brothers and sisters, siblings, cousins. It hurts friends. And there's a societal impact as well. People with severe substance use disorder often have a high rate of involvement with first responders like firefighters, EMTs, police. They have spend a great deal of time in emergency rooms, needing detox or crisis level care. They are often unemployed or underemployed for years on end. And eventually, people end up with housing instability where they're really not able to live full adult lives and be really active members of communities and societies. And so I think there's the effect to the person who is suffering and using, but there are knock-on effects because we live in relationship to one another. And community-based solutions, we believe, are a way forward. And it's really community members that come together to wrap their arms around those people and those families suffering that people begin to heal and families begin to heal. The other thing that we know from experience is that service helps everybody. And so we have a tremendous amount of volunteers. We have great donors, and the people who experience serving people in substance use disorder, helping people reclaim their lives and really grow into healthy, full people. The experience is joyful for those of us who are in that service. And so the knock-on effects are not just helping the individual, but that ripples out, into really joyful experiences.
Well, fantastic. I mean, it sounds like a very necessary approach to looking at not only treating an individual, but viewing it as a systemic and societal issue that addresses a lot of different needs. I can just imagine the strain on, like you said, first responders for somebody that has a substance abuse disorder.
Yeah, and it's difficult. There's on the continuum of care for substance use disorder, we would say that harm reduction is, crisis level interventions for people that are kind of on the streets that are really active in substance use. And that harm reduction measures are often intense and short-lived. There's Narcan, naloxone that people need to reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. But there's also mental health disorders that go with this, co-occurring disorders, symptoms that start to occur. And so it's disruptive, right, to society, and it's difficult, for emergency rooms, first responders to have to, address these things when that's not their training or that's not their first reason for being out there. And so, there's a lot of effort in the crisis level management, and hopefully the second level is treatment, and we would call that individual outpatient treatment, IOP, or maybe a 28-day inpatient treatment. And that is really a time where somebody can kind of catch their breath, maybe get a little bit of education to address their issue, but it's not a long-term solution. And so post-treatment, long-term recovery solutions are where we need to invest a lot of time and effort.
Wow. You're explaining things in a manner that definitely shows your stuff. How long have you been involved in substance abuse recovery?
Well, myself, I have lived experience myself, so I would, in answer to your question, that'd be 9 years. In 2017, I think it was, I went back to college and got an addiction studies degree, and I got my certified alcohol and drug counselor certification a few years later. I ran a long-term residential recovery program for men on a farm here in Palos Park. For about 4 years, I spent time as a counselor and case manager for a 3.1 halfway house in Blue Island that's really amazing. And so I think, 5 years or so I've been professionally involved in substance use disorder.
Wow. Well, so what are the areas, given your expertise and also everything that you've seen and studied, there's several areas that Second Story has really made kind of their pet project or focused a lot of their attention on. I know, for instance, there's the home in Alsip. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So in a program that I was running for men, that was a long-term residential recovery program, post-treatment recovery program, we developed a program so it was really successful. And so men were working their way through this program, and our goals were to get a year sober continually, to get a good paying job, and to try to get your name on a lease. And getting your name on a lease is a life marker, and that is really difficult, and a life marker that a lot of people have missed in substance use disorder. And so we were having gentlemen that were really successful, but because of the financial damage that occurs in long-term substance use disorder, credit scores were really low. And so we founded the Second Story Foundation at that point to help with the housing situation. And so in Alsip, we bought a house in Alsip in foreclosure and remodeled it with a lot of volunteer help. And we used it to help men get into the rental market. It's not a halfway house or a long-term recovery program. It's an independent living situation where men were able to get into the rental market regardless of their credit scores. And so in recovery, Bill White is a kind of well-known expert in long-term recovery, and I think he coined the term recovery capital. And it's like what we have in the bank that's going to support our long-term growth in life and in sobriety. And so some of those things are community involvement, being part of mutual aid societies, 12-step groups, being connected with other people who are healthy, having mentors, having a decent job, and having stable housing. These are all things that are capital in your bank to help you move forward in life. So we started to talk about recovery capital as, okay, what's your recovery score rather than your credit score? And so we try to help men build their recovery score up so they're really good bets to get into that long-term rental market. And so we've had 4 men for the last 2 years successfully living in our second-story Alsip house. Their credit scores have improved. They've gotten their licenses back, which is a real driver's license restoration is an arduous process. It takes a long time, and it's a financial burden. But all of the men that have entered our second-story Alsip program now have licenses, improved credit scores of 100 to 250 points. They're consistently employed, and they've been great tenants. So with that house, they get ongoing case management, kind of counseling as needed for support, but they're immersed in our community, and it's just been a huge success. So.
Wow, well, 100% of them getting their driver's license back through that's unheard of when it comes to substance abuse recovery.
It takes time, right? And it's without help, it's overwhelming. You know, having to deal with the Secretary of State and going through all the hurdles that you have to leap, which are legitimate, right? They're out there for everybody. They can be really overwhelming. And from having a revoked license, for instance, to getting your license in a car restored, that can be a $6,000-7,000 process, and it can take 18 months. And too often people start that process and they just kind of become overwhelmed by it. The stress of not knowing and having to live in that space without support is usually too much. So we help people just pick it out in pieces, take one step at a time, and keep them encouraged to keep moving. And when one member of our program sees another member succeed, then they know it's possible and they're more highly motivated.
That's great. So you talked about the house, but you also talked how big a hurdle transportation is. How does Second Story help out with that?
Right. So a few years ago, we started what we call our Second Story Drive program. And so what we came across was that, we had men who were getting good jobs, but they were spending $100, maybe $150 a week in ride shares to get to and from work. And so at that rate, when you're rebuilding a life from nothing, the financial burden to then, buy a car becomes too much. If you're spending $500 a month on ride shares, well, we said that's a car payment. And so the Second Story Foundation kind of pulled our resources and said, okay, here's what we can do. We can give you a micro loan for a starter car, maybe $2,500, $3,000, and we'll get you on the road, and you can pay that back at no interest at $100 a month. And that has proven massively successful. All the people that we have given loans have paid them all back in full. And that starter car then turns in a couple of years to a better car, and they're on the road. It increases their job prospects because it increases the possibilities of where they can go and make it out to work. So that's a major, major barrier in recovery, when somebody's starting a new life from scratch, that we've been able to address pretty successfully.
Wow. That's thinking about it from all the different facets and how all these dominoes really line up with one another, and you can address one, but if you don't address the other, then it can get, become a very arduous process that doesn't set somebody up for success.
Yeah, it's essentially to recover from substance use disorder, especially when your life has gotten to the point where, you're financially ruined, you have no stable housing, your relationships are frayed, you really don't have resources. The way back is a behavioral program, and behavioral change takes a tremendous amount of time. It's fraught with dangers. There's stressors in life that many people experience we take for granted, when we're well, but when you're rebuilding a life, those stressors are the kind of places where people tend to relapse and set themselves back. And so we offer that time and the constant involvement and that community immersion to help the behavioral changes really sink in and take place. And that process is longer than 28 days. It's a years-long process. So we're in it for the long haul.
Wow. Well, speaking about the long haul, I know there's another really big endeavor that Second Story's been working on with the ranch. Tell us about this a little bit.
Yeah, so it's probably the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. Our board of directors and some people had asked me if I could start a men's recovery program from scratch based on a model I had kind of worked with previously. And I said, get me a horse farm and I'll think about it. And I really didn't think anybody would find a horse farm. And lo and behold, a year later, just a few weeks ago, we closed on a 68-acre working horse farm in Crete, Illinois, just about 35 minutes from Palos Heights here. And somebody said, well, why a horse farm? And I said, because we'll have a work site that never runs out of work. And so our 68-acre Second Story ranch in Crete has the capacity to build homes and residences on. And so we have a capital project that we've just begun where we're going to build a 7,000 square foot lodge and community center space where we're going to be able to take up to 15 men who have suffered from severe substance use disorder, housing instability, and unemployment, chronic unemployment or underemployment. And those men will be able to, once they are accepted to the Second Story Ranch program, they'll be able to come out and live rent-free with no time limits, which makes it really a permanent supportive housing program. And they will have jobs on site, for the duration of their stay. And our experience is that, at about 6 to 9 months with the right coaching, the right peer support, the right counseling, community involvement, service work, and employment, at about 6 to 9 months, men will have healed enough and developed a work routine and a recovery routine where they'll feel strong enough and safe enough to go out in the community and work paid jobs, at which point we'll help them with financial management and planning. And that process usually is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on the person. But eventually we will help each individual move out and sign their own lease for independent living, where they can now turn around and be of service to the men that are coming into the program after them.
Wow. So you have kind of a cyclical vision for this of, you receive and then you help to provide in a lot of ways, and you're continuing by providing to continue to receive.
And so, the one way I've been thinking about it for a while, and we need lots of help, but we talk about resources a lot, and what are your resources? And the truth is, lives destroyed by substance use disorder, people end up homeless, friendless, no family, no healthy family attachments, no job, no money, and no prospects. And to be in that situation is truly despair. I mean, that is a desperate situation. And the fact of the matter is, all the counseling or medical, clinical treatment in the world isn't going to help that person out of that desperate spot. And so what we look at is, how can we gather resources from the community and deploy them in a way that we can help those people get the resources they need, and that's a home, that's shelter, food, clothing, and work. And if we can deploy those resources that we get from the larger community in a way where we can teach people how to maintain their resources, how to build upon them, and then go out and become independent. Really, it's the teach a man to fish model, right?
Yeah.
When we do that, we get a return on investment from the resources that are invested in us by the community, but we're able to see those knock-on effects and positive pro-social growth, not just for men, but for their families and for communities at large. So really, it's one of the things that we see with the ranch is a way to offer everything everybody needs in one place in one time, and then give them the support, the love, the direction they need to make their way forward in a hopeful and growth-filled way.
It sounds like a unique niche. How else is Second Story unique in its approach to handling or helping individuals who are working through substance abuse disorder?
Yeah, I think, well, right now, I think we're unique in our housing and ALSIP. I know that we are. I don't know any other programs that are offering to solve transportation issues in the way we are with no interest microloans. But we look holistically at what a person needs to succeed. And, with our Second Story Ranch project, the ability to bring a person home, we're a community-based organization. We're not a social service agency. We're not a licensed treatment program. And because of that, we're able to bring a member in and say, welcome home, we love you. And that's not something that a clinically based treatment program can do. And we're also able to say, we are in this with you for the long haul. What we care about is the outcome of your life. We care about the quality and duration of your sobriety. We care about the quality of your own relationships and your interactions in the community. And for that, we're able to stay in with our members for a very long time. And that's not something that you really see in the harm reduction part of the continuum of care for addictions. It's not something you see in the treatment part. And so to be a community-based organization who has these long-term goals, and that as long as you're involved, we're involved. And so that's pretty rare.
Yeah, well, that's really unique. You've mentioned the word community quite a bit, and I love hearing about it. How has the community responded to the initiatives, both in ALSIP and then also the ranch in Crete?
ALSIP has been amazing. ALSIP was great. There are, nationally, you may have heard of the NIMBY word, right? Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And that's an issue for a lot of different societal problems. People they think, hey, we should help people, but maybe not next door. And ALSIP was wonderful. And I think because we're small, because we're connected with individual communities, we've gotten a great response. ALSIP was wonderful. I can tell you that, about a year ago, we saw the farm that we were looking at. We were developing this project in Will County, and the first person I talked to was Dr. Kathleen Burke, the Director of Substance Use Initiatives with the Will County Health Department. And her response was just amazing. She said, this is exactly what we need. She saw the whole picture, the wraparound care, and so she was the first person I talked to was responsive. And so she pointed me towards a board member in Will County named Judy Ogala. And Judy was just wonderful, saw the whole picture, and introduced me to somebody else. And so the Will County board members that I've spoken with, the Will County executive, the Will County Health Department, Elizabeth Bellotta there, they have been absolutely amazing in being able to see the vision. They recognize the need, and then being able to support us, and whether that's with funding, or zoning, or even just, encouraging the project. They've been amazing, and I couldn't be more grateful.
That's great. A lot of times, like you said, NIMBY is very real.
Right.
They don't want it in their backyard, but you've got the opposite. It sounds like everybody that's in the community in Crete and also in ALSIP is excited for what it is that Second Story is doing.
Christ Community Church, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, United Methodist Church of Crete, they've all become supporters. We've got, a tremendous volunteer base. And I think one thing, that may be a little different in our approach is we're not hiding. We have a way forward that is joyful. And one thing I try to say over and over again is that to live in active substance use disorder is just abject suffering. Our programs and our mission is to embrace that suffering with love and then transform that into the joy of living recovery. And that's something that we put right out front and center. And so when we come to town in Will County and Crete and ALSIP, we say, hey, this is amazing. we're not hiding in a corner, and we say, watch this, watch what happens. You're going to love to be a part of this. And so far, that's the responses we've gotten have been great.
That's fantastic. Well, you say joy, and I'm sure these visions come about with great joy and wonderful imagination and fantastic drawings and things and vision for it, but it takes a lot of work in order to make the vision come into place. So kind of where is the project in relation to living out and fulfilling the vision?
Right. So we've just climbed a major hurdle. We look at 3 separate funding buckets, 3 separate phases of this project at the Second Story Ranch. And it's a heavy lift. And so we looked around, and so 1 was property acquisition, 2 is the capital project to build the lodge and residences, and the 3rd is ongoing operations. And so we kind of looked out at the landscape, and we know that for a lot of people, and whether that's state funding, private family foundations, corporate foundations, look and say, wow, that's a big project. And so we said, you know what, we'll go first. We'll put in not just sweat equity, but real equity. And thanks to the Illinois Facilities Fund of Chicago, IFF Chicago, who are amazing, we were able to close a deal on our property acquisition. So we made the first investment. We're all in on this farm. And so we purchased the Second Story Ranch a few weeks ago, March 14th. I'll never forget the date. And so our next project is that capital phase where we can build our lodge and residences. And so we're working with the Aspen Group, construction firm in Frankfurt, and we have wonderful schematics, floor plans, designs. We're looking at all the different infrastructure issues that we're addressing right now to become shovel ready. If we're well funded, we could be shovel ready for our residential project at the end of October. That remains to be seen. We are really hopeful. The Illinois Opioid Remediation Board, which is the overseeing board of the Illinois Opioid Settlement Fund, at the end of January, approved $20 million for capital to build permanent supportive housing for people with substance use disorder. And we think we're an excellent candidate for that. And if that grant process works out, we could be moving pretty quickly.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you're talking about already thinking about, planning on, moving on, not just the phase of construction, but the phase of making it a home, making it a center, making it a care facility.
Yeah, and it's a place to bring people home.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things, there are other housing programs. There's one called Housing First. And for people with severe substance use disorder who have been actively addicted and suffering from housing instability for years on end, they need more than just, here's an apartment, now good luck. Yeah. It's been a long time since they've had a stable home where there's been healthy love, direction, accountability, standards, the kinds of things that we hope people grow up with. And so we are building a place where we can say, you're home now, let's heal, let's take care of each other, and let's learn how to grow forward. Yeah. And so our vision is pretty well laid out. We're hopeful, that the Illinois Opioid Settlement Board, will approve a grant when the the Notice of Funding Opportunity comes out. We're working with Senator Dick Durbin's office on congressionally directed spending for our staff housing. And we're going to be, doing our best to attract large family foundations and corporate foundations to help support us. We always need, community donations, to help with our ongoing operations. But we've got a plan.
Yeah. So you've mentioned financial contributions and help out that way to bring the vision around. How else can people get involved or even find out more about the Second Story Foundation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that I think we can say is that we just bought the ranch in March, and already we were developing a program even before we had closed on the property. So we in May we'll be beginning our recovery-oriented community service program. Mm-hmm. And so we're partnering with the Recovery Community Center of Joliet to help people who are in justice involved, and these are people who have gotten into legal trouble, who, as part of their restitution, need to complete a certain number of community service hours for court. So we're going to help bus those people out to the farm, and they'll help clean up our site and prepare it for construction and get their community service hours done while we do peer-supported groups on site. That'll start in May 6th, and we'll have people out there Tuesdays, Thursdays for the community service project. And then Saturdays, we're opening that day up as a volunteer day for the public to work alongside people in recovery, people trying to rebuild their lives. Mm-hmm. So, we'll have information posted on our website about the recovery-oriented community service program. And on May 8th, Keller Williams Realty has volunteered to bring at least 100 volunteers to our farm to help clean up projects and preparation projects. And so we're encouraging anybody who can make that. We're going to be out there from 9 to 3 o'clock on May 8th, and this is at the Second Story Ranch at 2400 Bemis Road, Bemes. That's in Crete, Illinois. And we are always looking for people, who can help, have a passion to help in any way. And we don't turn down any way someone can help. We want to bring people in. Everybody's got strengths. Everybody's got something to share. And if there are people that want to volunteer, we'll figure out the best way for that person to help. It's really about pairing people up and working together. And the more people we have, the more creative solutions we find.
Yeah. Well, it echoes the word that you said over and over again of community. I mean, building a community of recognizing everybody's got some assets and everybody's got some challenges, but as a community, there's a lot of strength.
I think, there's tough times now and ahead in the behavioral health field. There are a lot of things that are, I would call them macro forces, that macroeconomic forces, political forces, governmental forces, that are going to put a strain on the traditional ways that social service agencies and treatment agencies address behavioral health issues. And we believe that community is the way forward. That, we look around and say, hey, maybe nobody else is coming to help. It's time for us to start working. And that takes people locking arms and getting to work together. And so one of the things that we like to say is when we're encouraging others, whether that's to begin a life in recovery or to help with service, hey, we'll go first, right? And so the Second Story Ranch, over and over again, and the Second Story Foundation is kind of an organization that says to others, we'll go first, right? We're out here, we're going to be doing the work, please come help, please come donate. Together, I think, is the only way forward.
Fantastic. Well, as we look to wrap up, what would you offer, based off of your expertise, your experience, what would you offer or say to somebody who was stuck with substance abuse and really struggling with what is it that they should do? How is it that they can move forward?
That is such a tough question, and it's important. Substance use disorder exists on a spectrum, right? And so there are people that might have still intact families, still, good marriages, good family involvement. And I would say, talk to your friends and family. There are other people on the other end of the spectrum, who have struggled and maybe have been in and out and just don't see a way forward. I would say find a helper and ask for help. The first step is to ask for help, to say, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do. Can you show me the way? And that can begin at a police station, a fire station, a health department. It can be 911, honestly. It's not what it's always there for, but if someone's ready for help, there are ways to get it. And as an individual, one thing I can say is that if you just really don't know what to do, you can reach out to us at the Second Story Foundation. Our email address is 2nd story, STORY, foundation, FOUNDATION, @gmail.com. And anyone who reaches out to us will get a response. And I would tell them there's hope, there's a way forward, and you may not see it now, but there's someone that loves you.
Yeah. Following up with that, if a family member or a friend or somebody that I loved was struggling with substance abuse and I recognized that it was keeping them from living life to the fullest or life in abundance, what can I do? What would you recommend that I do?
Almost the same thing. Ask for help. And for friends, for friends and family who are deeply affected and who maybe have, psychological or emotional scars from the battles that you end up in, I would say Al-Anon is a 12-step support group that is for family and friends of people with substance use disorder that is really, really useful. But it's the same kind of thing. Look online, find a recovery community organization in your neighborhood. And I will say again, if you just don't know what to do and a friend or family needs help, you can email us at the same address. But I would also say don't give up. So the number one thing, the most spiritual thing we can do, the most human thing we can do is to embrace suffering with love. How that looks, you may need help with, but there's a way forward, and the change is possible.
It's fantastic. Well, statistically, a majority of people are going to fall into one of those categories of either themselves struggling with substance abuse disorder or having been directly affected by having a loved one in their life that has been, struggled with that in the past. So it's amazing to hear the breadth of the work that Second Story is doing and the call to not give up and the way that Second Story is stepping up to, like you said, go first and be a resource. How is it that people can get in touch? You mentioned the email address. That's the best way for people to get in touch with Second Story if they want to get involved or if they have questions? Yeah,
you can also visit our website. That's the same email address, Second Story Foundation, 2ND, STORY Foundation, .org. And on that website, you can donate, you can find our phone number, we take all calls, and you can find out more information about us, and you can actually get a hold of me through that website.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for the work of Second Story Foundation and what they're doing to give hope and help create community around people that so often are abandoned or neglected or cast aside. So really appreciate the service that you do for the community.
And I want to thank you. You've been such a great supporter and a great friend and a great resource for me personally. I'd really like to thank, Palos Heights TV here for giving me the opportunity to share our story.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you also for tuning in to this month's edition of the Community Bridge. We hope that it was helpful for you to find ways in which you can find hope in these difficult, challenging times of things that might be going on with your life. Until next time, God bless.